Joined by Mark Kingwell, professor of philosophy at the University of Toronto, who writes in the Globe and Mail that no reasonable person could support Donald Trump based on everything we've seen in the past year. Good morning, Mark.
Hey, Mark. How are you?
Great. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks.
And I think there is lots of evidence to support the idea that Donald Trump is well, I don't even have time to get into all the things that Donald Trump is in this question. But is it possible that there are still reasonable people who are supporting him because they see him as better than the alternatives in American politics right now? Is it possible that this is just politics and that he's not in a category by himself?
Well, it's a really good question, and I can tell you from the response I've had to this article and others that I've published, and of course that others have published that are critical of Mr. Trump, that there is pushback, of course, on this. I should say the online version of my recent piece went live 2 days ago. The print version is in today's Globe and Mail, if anybody still looks at the print version of a newspaper. I wanted to force the issue a little bit because it seemed to me that we've been doing a lot of tortuous kind of rationalization, normalization, trying to find some kind of explanation for why this is even possible, and yet Mr. Trump, by the day, by the week, confounds our attempts to make a rational narrative possible about his presidency. So now that we're 1 year plus into this administration, it seemed to me that, especially with the, I won't repeat the word, but the remarks that have been quoted, and I know that they are now disputed, about Haiti and Africa, that once again a line had been crossed. And it seemed to me that, especially in the light of a very, very faint-hearted response from Republican supporters, it was time to call the question. So that's what I tried to do in my column.
And I think we're always struggling in society to figure out when something is just an extreme example in the normal range or when something is in a different category that can lead us down a very dangerous path, right? That's always an evaluation that's got to take place, and we've been fortunate for the most part in North America not to have had examples like there have been in other parts of the world, like Germany, where you suddenly discover your country's being taken in a sharply different direction and in a very dangerous direction. So, are we saying this is one of these times that something's got to be done to stop Donald Trump because he's no ordinary politician?
You know, I've held back myself on judgments like that because I think history teaches us that you can't be too rash in making comparisons like that.
And there's a lot of hyperbole in politics, right?
Absolutely.
People invoke this kind of thing a lot, right? So when you do, there can be a little bit of crying wolf to this.
Well,
sometimes.
That's the thing. You cheapen the stakes of the discourse if you go too high too fast. And,
yeah.
I just did yesterday a webinar on critical thinking with a British philosopher called Tom Hatfield, and we were talking about this. You know, we have to recall that if you go back not even just 50 years, but a bit longer, people were hacking each other to pieces over the kinds of differences that now we simply insult each other over on Twitter. So there are large historical gains that we've made, and we should be aware of that. That we, yes, there is violence sometimes, but for the most part, the violence is rhetorical, and that's a huge gain in human history. So that's one point to make. And then the second thing, though, is I'm mindful of how sneaky this can be. So if you do look at Germany, for example, if you look at the rhetoric of philosophers and journalists who were writing in the first part of the 20th century into the 30s, there is a kind of slyness about how institutions get undermined. And so I think what's good about the discourse is don't be hyperbolic, but be aware and be mindful and vigilant. And I think we're seeing that. And I have great faith in the robustness of democratic institutions. I think they are sufficiently strong to resist mostly the depredations of even somebody as unhinged as I think he is, as Mr. Trump. But on the other hand, we have seen that they can be undermined. So we have to be mindful of that as well.
You raise a few points about why it is that Donald Trump is still getting supported by some people, including politicians, Republicans in particular, but the system is kind of supporting Trump and still respecting him for the office that he holds. And one that you raise is the idea that he's too big to fail, that there's too much at stake if Donald Trump were to fail. And on a certain level, I kind of subscribe to this in one respect, and that is not that I have a vested interest in his tax plan or something like that, but more that if Donald Trump were to be removed from office somehow, that that scenario might be more precarious than even the one that we're facing now with him in office.
It's really, I think about this daily, and there are some general and some particular points. The particular points are, suppose Mr. Trump was impeached, that would mean that Mike Pence would be president. And I think many people fear that would be even worse in some way because he is a committed ideologue in a way that Trump isn't. Trump is much more a kind of loose cannon figure. The general points are...
And Pence, of course, is probably more effective at working the system than Trump would be, right? He'd be a more conventional politician.
And much more in bed with traditional Republican power. The general point, though, which is...
Not to mention the backlash that would result from Trump having been removed from power, and that I worry about riots and things like that because the democratically elected president, from the perspective of the people who supported him, would have been thrown overboard, and I'm sure he would not go quietly.
Just exactly what I was about to say.
Oh, sorry.
So,
sorry.
No, but you make the point eloquently. And, when we think back to, say, Nixon, and people have made comparisons to Nixon, those of us who are old enough to remember what happened there weren't riots, but there was a tremendous deflation of belief in the democratic project and a kind of hollowing out of faith in institutions. And that was not a good thing. I mean, the skepticism was good, but the idea that somehow there was a total erosion of trust has actually had a long tail of pernicious effect on political life not just in the United States, I think everywhere.
Yeah.
And so, yes, we have to respect democratic process and democratic decisions. And so I'm actually not in favor of impeachment. I think what we need to do, I just mean critics, is just keep hammering the points and uncovering the falsehoods and focusing on the crazy, and just keep pushing and pushing and pushing.
Until he's democratically defeated?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think what I mean in the short term, the midterm elections should probably, it looks like, loosen the stranglehold that the Republicans have on the House and the Senate, and that could be interesting, of course, because one of the things that we see right now is that not only are people like Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan, who I mentioned in my column, simply apparently craven creatures of the current administration, but there's no legislative progress here. I know people will disagree, people who like the tax plan, for example, which I don't. But suppose after the midterms, the Democrats make some inroads, then we might actually see a Congress that can kind of leave the president behind and get on with the business of good government in the United States. And I think everybody would welcome that.
All right. Great to talk to you again, Mark. Thank you very much for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you.